Morning guys, welcome back to VALORANT. So much happening in the VALORANT world over the last 24 hours. G2 win the Americas playoffs. The groups have been officially determined going into stage 2, and very controversial ones at that. Ye certainly gives his opinion on where Evil Geniuses line up, and the massive coach drama around the world continues as well. Spicy stuff hitting the timeline everywhere. Many of the teams turning up to Toronto now know where they stand with respect to their rivals. Very much enjoyed your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. I would greatly appreciate it. We are going to start right here with confirmation that Masters Toronto will feature the new Teho nerf, will be active there, and also Sunset will be back in time. So that's the rumour anyway, and as basically said it on stream, that's the Teho nerf will be through, the Sunset map pool change will be in time for Masters Toronto. So probably expected, but still it's a pretty big deal, right? Because they've played with the most recent patch update for the latest qualifiers and the end of the stage, the playoffs, and then Toronto will be played on potentially a rather different meta than we are currently experiencing. But this is Riot Games, baby. This is VALORANT Esports. Now, Paper X, they 2-0'd Boom Esports. They got the job done. I think, unfortunately for Boom, this is probably inevitable. As good as they looked in the qualifiers, I don't want to go as far to call them Cloud9, right? They turn up to the playoffs and they choke. But I don't know. They were playing really well. But when push comes to shove in the playoffs, it is tough, isn't it, to execute that same level again. And Paper X, they capitalise. And frankly, this was not especially close. 13-5 on the game one. We saw how that was starting to unfold just yesterday. And then the fracture was 13-8 on Boom Esports pick. So what a win. Paper X, they are building it track by track. Jing goes double positive, 46 in 23, nearly 300 ACS. Boom Esports knocked out of the tournament. And they continue on. The next matchup in the bracket and the deciding game in 3 days' time, roughly 4 days' time, is DRX Paper X. So here we go again. This matchup determines which team goes to Toronto and which team does not. And, Gen.G RRQ have already qualified. What a massive game. Doesn't get much better than that. Of course, DRX, they've made their run as well. Paper X started from the losers bracket and then making their run all the way back through despite a very tricky start to the stage for them. FNS, of course, was pretty happy that they're taking care of business one game at a time, and they're now one game away from making it to Masters Toronto. Now, speaking of DRX and the Pacific, let's get back to business, ladies and gentlemen, because yesterday was very dramatic. This is Termi on the left-hand side, this is Frost on the right-hand side, beefing it up over, well, some sort of drama behind the scenes. So, we talked about this in some detail yesterday, why Frost isn't happy with Termi, why, the other guys aren't happy the other way around, who knows? And all this drama mainly around scrims getting leaked, right? And it was a big talking point yesterday that Chet obviously got banned for sharing that VOD a few months ago, but the rumour has it anyway that teams definitely do share their scrims around with other teams to potentially give, if you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours type thing in terms of giving information to other teams and taking advantage of it. This is seemingly like a done thing. I mean, basically everyone who's come out and said, yeah, like this happens in certain regions. But the question is like who's doing it, whether Riot can do anything about it, and also who's guilty of this, because the implication is, Frost has made it pretty clear that he thinks, yeah, Termi has been at fault for this before, and that's certainly been the implication. Frost then after the game, because of course they lost, they got 2-0s, came out and said, there is real smoke between us. It's just a me and him thing that probably would never be resolved, and that's okay. It doesn't seem like it's just about the scrim leaking stuff. It seems like there's more to it than that. Now, things got real tasty here because apparently Coach Frost called him like an expletive on the stage. And then Termi goes on to say, this is professional sports, I've been tolerating it, but I hope Riot disciplines him for this. Honestly, I think he's crazy. I hope he goes back to his country, the United States, he says. Now, of course, this was causing a lot of controversy, this line. My understanding is, before we go further, is that there is always, with these comments, some, there can be mistranslations here. Like, my understanding is, I don't speak Korean, right? But, my understanding is that what he may have been saying is, I hope he goes back to his region, as in, don't stay in the Pacific and work here, go back and work in the Americas. Now that's a very different statement to say, go back to your country type thing, right? That's a very different statement. So, I just wanted to kind of put that out there, that take these things with a grain of salt, really. And also this one, right? So yesterday we saw Jess, coach, was talking about how Frost had Termi had disrespected his mother or something. And apparently this was the comments that happened in. and it got mistranslated that Termi was talking about Frost's mother, but actually he just said, I felt like there was a lack of sportsmanship and manners. So, I mean, yeah, it's all a bit of a mess, isn't it, really? So maybe this has been blown out of proportion to some degree. The thing that I find more interesting is on the scrim leaks, right? Scrim sharing in this type of discussion, right? Because you know, that's, well, this is the discussion anyway. In VCT Pacific, you can negotiate with other coaches to share scrims in order to get an unfair competitive advantage, taking any integrity out. This is not illegal and won't get you punished. And that is kind of how it seems to be. Now, Governor quote tweeted this and says, I've nothing to gain from saying this, but last year on Talon, we had proof of some teams scrim sharing. So the idea is, if you guys are brand new here, that if I'm scrimming against a certain team, I may share that team's composition with my boy on another team, and then he will share information from a scrim that they play, and we trade information, and we give ourselves a competitive advantage. But apparently Talon showed this to Riot. They didn't really care. But, you know, apparently they had proof that teams were sharing scrims. Now, what that proof is, I'd love to see it, right? What they sent to Riot. But apparently Riot said, we can't really enforce anything. I don't know what's going on there now, if the problem still exists, but in my experiences last year, it was definitely a thing. I do think that it should be enforced as a rule as well. Buzz then comes out, of course, now he's on T1 and says, Termi, his coaches and the DRX Club are really grateful and respectful people in my life. There have been legends back in the day as well. So, you know, his implication is that he doesn't think there's anything untoward happening. And Termi says the same thing. So he comes out with an assessment yesterday that effectively says the following. So he writes this statement out here, of course this is translated from the original Korean, and says that DRX has never leaked any scrims. If anything, we were victims of a scrim leak back in 2021, and we know the feeling all too well. We consider scrim leaking to be deeply unprofessional as well of how damaging it is. So, you know, then he goes on to say, look, Coach Frost claims to have evidence. If that's true, we want him to clearly state what teams, players or coaches are involved and publicly release the proof that was submitted to Riot Games. As someone who has been in esports for over 20 years, I will retire tomorrow if there is any credible evidence that states DRX leaked scrim information, but if no such evidence is presented, then I demand Coach Frost to take full responsibility for fueling these baseless rumours. So, absolute bagger as always. Drama in the Pacific never goes away. And, well, now the ball is back in Frost's court because Termi has said, look, you've been fueling these rumours by not, you know, fist bumping and shaking hands and all this stuff, and it's been fueling all the drama in the scene over the last 24 hours. And then he's saying, okay, well, I never did this. You have no proof that I ever did this. And, well, please provide it. Otherwise, well, clearly, the ball's in his court, right? The ball's now in Frost's court. So say, okay, this is the proof. This is why I believe in this way. I guess time will tell. And, you know, good bit of content coming out of the Americas to recognize a similar thing. I thought this video was pretty funny. They could have at least told Kaplan to get walking. I mean, like, you see at the start of the video, he's not walking, is he, right? Like, he's just started going there. So I thought that was all rather funny. But the grand finals continues, and the result was another banger, right? G2 played Sentinels, and Trent on the Teho masterclass, right? And you gotta say, this whole Trent Teho thing, it might not last forever with the changes going into Toronto, but you know, for now it's been pretty spectacular. So G2, what a run that they made from, of course, losing earlier on, making the run all the way through the bracket to make it to the grand finals and beat Sentinels in the end as well. They even beat Sentinels on their split, which is not usually seen, but G2 actually picked it on this occasion. Sen then bounced back on the Pearl. Maybe there was the potential for a reverse sweep in the series where John QT had the Teho on this time, and then the Ascent happened and it was 13-10. It was a competitive series, right? Like, Sentinels, I think, can't be too dissatisfied. Of course, you want to win. You never want to lose. But, you know, look, both teams have made it to Toronto. That is the big deal, really, for both of these teams. But G2, what a run that they made from where they were in the bracket all the way through to securing the 10 points for the end of the season. They lost to Sentinels earlier on in the bracket. They beat 100T. They beat Evil Geniuses. They beat MIBR. And now they got revenge on Sentinels in the grand final. So this is what they do. I think Evil Geniuses will look at this and say, damn, like, that could have been a different story, right? If we just managed to actually execute in that final series, they could have beaten G2. It could have been a very, very different story indeed. But no, G2 make it back-to-back America's champs as Valin. Zekken wasn't too unhappy with this performance. He was like, look, they deserve to win. They were better. But look, we've improved. There's more room to grow. Zekken says he's been playing great, so we'll see if he can keep that up. I'm sure that he can. And this is how it looks right now, right? So in terms of total points, which is important for qualifying for the World Championship, G2, they're sitting at 16. they're sitting very pretty indeed. But Sentinels second at 9, MRBR not far behind, Crew not far behind either, and the rest of the teams kind of floundering behind that. And these are going to be your groups for the second split. Now, the big drama about these groups is that, I guess we can quickly comment on them. G2, Sentinels, Cloud9, pretty strong start. Interesting, first of all, that G2 and Sentinels, the two teams that were just in the finals, are in the same group. You might think, well, how has that happened? How does that make any sense? Well, as you may tell, the groups here have been determined by seeding from the original groups, which is a very, very confusing way to do it, because Crew, all of a sudden, despite bombing out of the playoffs, are now the number 1 seed. I think it's honestly so, it's really biased when you do it this way, because you're basing the groups from Split 2 based on the groups from Split 1, which were not exactly equal necessarily, right? And also that's quite a long time ago now. So you're looking at teams that played certain teams that may have been easy or hard, and then based on their numbers in those particular groups, you're then seeding them again based on those numbers, despite the fact that really, the telling point here is what happened at the playoffs. I mean, if we go back to the playoffs here and see the results, G2 were number 1, Sentinels were 2nd, MRBR were 3rd, EG were 4th, 100T and Crew were 5th, 6th, and NRG Cloud9 were 7th, 8th, right? So maybe you would think, okay, for the teams that were not at the playoffs, you seed them based on their results last stage in the regular qualifiers. But for those that did make the playoffs, surely it might make sense to seed them based on the playoff results, which would therefore put G2 as the number 1 seed in Alpha and Sentinels as the number 1 seed in Omega. That might make sense. Having the two best teams in the same group again doesn't really seem fair to me. But look, at the end of the day, they're not bad groups. Like Evil Geniuses, they might be happy enough that they're in a group with 2G and Furia. Obviously, on the other side, it's still pretty tasty, right? I mean, this group Omega is real tasty with Crew, MIBR, 100T, NRG, Lev, and Loud. Especially because Loud should get better, right? You would think. Make a couple of changes, they can make some steps. But as Ye says, hang on a second, right? Why have we done it like this? Why were the Stage 2 groups seeded using the Stage 1 group result and not the playoff placement? Doesn't it make way more sense to use playoff placement, if possible, than group stages? Which, I agree, but look, sense and making these groups every stage of Riot doesn't always seem to necessarily go in tandem, and Evil Geniuses therefore find themselves down here, despite the fact that if they came 4th at the playoffs, right, so theoretically their seed should have been higher, and I mean, if we think about the results, you would expect it to maybe have gone G2 Sentinels, MIBR, and then maybe EG, right? If you were going to do it like that, so maybe it might have helped EG get a better group, but it's not how it is. So we'll see what Time says on that one, but very much intrigued to your thoughts on all of this stuff in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.